The fall of the Jedi Order and the subsequent rise of the Galactic Empire marked a dark chapter in the history of the galaxy far, far away. Central to this upheaval were two of the greatest Jedi Masters of their time, Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. As survivors of the cataclysmic Jedi Purge and witnesses to the corruption within their own order, Yoda and Obi-Wan were faced with the immense task of preserving the Jedi's legacy while reconsidering its future. Their shared vision for a revamped Jedi Order evolved during their exile, shaped by their failures of the past and the hope for a brighter future. This video explores their philosophical reflections, the lessons they learned from the collapse of the Jedi Order, and the core principles they may have envisioned for a new Jedi Order to rise from the ashes of the old. To understand Yoda and Obi-Wan's vision for a reformed Jedi Order, it is important to analyze what led to the downfall of the original Jedi. For centuries, the Jedi Order had been the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, serving as mediators, diplomats, and warriors when necessary. However, their rigid adherence to tradition and their close alliance with the Republic government contributed to their downfall. The Jedi's detachment from emotion, especially attachment and love, had become a hallmark of their philosophy. But this very detachment blinded them to the realities around them. They also became entangled in the political workings of the Republic, diminishing their role as impartial peacekeepers. Palpatine's rise to power as Darth Sidious exposed the cracks within the Jedi Order. Their inability to sense the growing darkness and the Sith's influence, even as it took in root on the highest levels of government, unscored their vulnerability. The Jedi became generals in the Clone Wars, further blurring the line between peacekeeping and militarism, which distanced them from their spiritual core. In short, the Jedi were out of touch with the galaxy's changing dynamics, and their strict adherence to the doctrine left them unprepared to deal with the emerging threat of the Sith. Yoda, as the most senior and revered member of the Jedi Council, bore that weight of the Jedi Order's failure. During his exile on Dagobah, he had ample time to reflect on the mistakes that had been made. One of Yoda's key realizations was that the Jedi Order had lost its way by becoming too rigid and dogmatic. Their strict code, while valuable in maintaining discipline, had become too focused on the suppression of emotion rather than understanding and channeling it. This rigidity was part of what led to Anakin Skywalker's fall. Anakin's struggle to reconcile his love for Padme and his loyalty to the Jedi reflected a broader failure of the Order to accommodate the complexities of personal relationships and emotions. Yoda's encounter with the Force priestesses on the planet of Wellsprings of Life, as seen in the Clone Wars animated series, also deepened his understanding of the Force. He learned that the Jedi's approach to the Force had been incomplete. It was not simply about the light and the dark sides, but about balance. The Jedi's failure to acknowledge the shadow within themselves and to suppress darker emotions such as fear and anger contributed to their downfall. Yoda's training in the ways of retaining one's consciousness after death through communication with the living Force also signaled a shift in his thinking. This focus on a balance and the broader aspects of the Force would likely been central to the vision of a revamped Jedi Order. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda's faithful disciple and one of the few survivors of the Jedi Purge, also spent his years in exile contemplating the Order's failings. Unlike Yoda, Obi-Wan's reflections were deeply personal. As the Jedi who trained Anakin Skywalker and failed to prevent his fall to the dark side, Obi-Wan Kenobi carried a profound sense of guilt and responsibility. His failure with Anakin was a failure of the Jedi Order as a whole, but for Obi-Wan, it was also intensely personal tragedy. In his time on Tatooine watching over young Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan realized that he had come to terms with the idea that the old ways of the Jedi were insufficient. He recognized that the Jedi's detached approach to emotional relationships had contributed to Anakin's vulnerability to manipulation by Palpatine. Anakin, who was desperate to protect his loved ones, found the Jedi's insistence on suppressing attachment unworkable. Obi-Wan therefore may have realized that the new Jedi Order would need to embrace compassion and love as part of its philosophy rather than suppress it. Obi-Wan's vision for a new Jedi Order likely focused on greater emotional intelligence, an understanding of personal relationships, and a more flexible approach to the Jedi Code. He, like Yoda, understood that the Jedi had to be more adaptable to survive in a galaxy where the Sith had risen to power by exploiting the Order's weaknesses. A central part of both Yoda and Obi-Wan's vision for the future was their belief in the prophecy of the Chosen One. Even after Anakin's fall, they believed the balance to the Force could be restored through the Skywalker bloodline. Though Luke was untrained in the ways of the Force, both Yoda and Obi-Wan placed their hopes in him. Luke represented a fresh start, a chance to rebuild the Jedi in a way that addressed the failures of the past. Yoda and Obi-Wan recognized that Luke's training would have to be different. Instead of raising him with the strict confines of the Jedi Temple, they allowed him to grow up outside of the Jedi's influence, living an ordinary life on Tatooine. This decision showed a departure from the old Jedi tradition of separating younglings from their families at an early age to begin training. By allowing Luke to maintain connections with his family and friends, Yoda and Obi-Wan perhaps hoped that he would develop a healthier relationship with his emotions than Anakin did. When Obi-Wan eventually began to train Luke, his approach was less about indoctrination and more about guiding Luke to make his own choices. He encouraged Luke to confront his fears and face his destiny, but he did not impose rigid rules or expect him to follow the old Jedi path unquestionably. Yoda, too, tempered in his teachings with the recognition that Luke needed to understand the dark side, not just reject it blindly. In doing so, they helped Luke build a foundation of resilience, compassion, and understanding, which allowed him to face and ultimately redeem his father. Based on the reflections and experiences of Yoda and Obi-Wan, we can imagine several key principles that would define their vision for a revamped Jedi Order. Emotional balance over suppression. One of the most important changes Yoda and Obi-Wan would likely advocate is a more nuanced approach to emotions. Rather than suppressing all attachment and personal relationships, the new Jedi Order would recognize the importance of compassion, empathy, and emotional intelligence. Jedi would still need to guard against fear and anger leading to the dark side, but they would be encouraged to develop healthy relationships and understand their emotions rather than repress them. A focus on balance in the Force. The old Jedi Order was fixated on the light side of the Force and sought to eliminate any trace of darkness. However, Yoda's later realizations about the nature of the Force emphasized the importance of balance. The new Jedi Order would likely teach that the Force is about harmony between the light and the dark, rather than the dominance of one side over the other. This approach would encourage Jedi to confront their inner darkness and find peace with it, rather than denying its existence. A return to spiritual roots. Yoda and Obi-Wan may have also envisioned a return to the Jedi's spiritual roots. Distancing the Order from its militaristic role in galactic politics, the Jedi of the New Order would act as guides, teachers, and healers, rather than soldiers or enforcers. They would focus on their connection to the living Force and the will of the Force, rather than being bound by the bureaucracy of a political institution like the Republic. A more flexible Jedi Code. The old Jedi Code was rigid and absolute, which left little room for the individual interpretation or adaptation. In a revamped Jedi Order, the code would likely be more flexible, allowing Jedi to navigate complex and moral ethical situations without feeling bound by dogma. Jedi would be encouraged to use their judgment and act with compassion rather than simply following rules. Training and development. Finally, Yoda and Obi-Wan would likely reform the way Jedi were trained. Rather than separating younglings from their families at an early age and isolating them in the temple, the new Jedi Order might allow for a more organic development. Jedi would be trained in the Force while still maintaining their connections to the world around them, preventing the isolation and emotional repression that contributed to Anakin's fall. Yoda and Obi-Wan's vision for a revamped Jedi Order was shaped by the lessons of the past and the hope for a future where the mistakes of the old order would not be repeated. They envisioned a Jedi Order that is more emotionally intelligent, spiritually balanced, and adaptable. Their teachings to Luke Skywalker reflected these changes, and Luke's triumph over Darth Vader marked the beginning of this new chapter in Jedi history. This new Jedi Order would not be bound by the strict traditions of the dogmas in the past, but would instead embrace the complexities of the galaxy and the individuals within it. With compassion, balance, and wisdom at its core, the revamped Jedi Order would stand as a beacon of hope and peace, not through force or domination, but through understanding and harmony.